Richard, can I tell you something that I find to be rather ironic? And this will probably be taken as the highest of compliments about you.
Okay.
You have some James Garner energy about you.
Oh, that is the nicest thing you could say to me. That literally you have,
That make your life.
No one's ever said that.
Really? You also and I also kind of be honest with you, you kind of look like James Garner.
Come on.
I'm not kidding.
Now
I'm not kidding.
Wait.
Every time when I'm watching things with him in it, I'm like, I understand why Richard likes him. Because you have the same energy about you. Because I know that James Garner is someone that you're. But let me put it this way. If I said, hey, Richard, tell me about the Rockford Files, we'd be here all day.
Oh, yes, we would. Yeah. No, I love James Garner. He comes from a generation of actors where, I'm going to be the old guy and say, boy, you just don't get him like that anymore because
don't.
Well, he's clearly an attractive guy, but he doesn't look like, a young male French fashion model, which is what a lot of actors look like now. They're pretty. I wouldn't say he's pretty. He's kind of rugged, and there's an authenticity to him as a human being where he's able to just sort of, kind of like you and I were talking about, he's able to project his authentic self into the world and certainly on his face and through his physicality, so much so that any role you see him in, you pretty much buy. And you buy it because of him. He's sort of like, I want to say Clint Eastwood, an actor who is himself first and the role second. And if those two things match up, it can be, combustible. It's like, oh, perfect. It's like Maverick, Rockford. Those were roles that were so perfectly tailored to James Garner that they became legendary.
Right.
Now, I know we're going to talk about this one. I'd say this is another one that's pretty close and sort of surprising, but continue on, please. Tell me more about how I'm like James Garner.
Well, I don't know if you're like James Garner, but you look like James Garner.
From now on, I look like James Garner, and I've got James Garner energy.
You do.
AGE.
And that's the funny thing. You mentioned the authenticity. If you do research about James Garner, also, you'll find out that he is, I would say, atypical in a lot of ways of his contemporaries. Even people that he's in this movie with. James Garner was a very private person. He was very serious about his family. Him and his wife separated 3 times, I believe, but they stayed married from, 50, 56, yeah. I think, until 2014 when he passed away. That is, again, not to kind of talk about the industry, but that is very unheard of as a big time actor in the industry to only have one spouse and have, kids with that person and nobody else. That's relatively unheard of. And especially, again, someone who keeps their life private. I can respect that. I can respect that. If that were me, if I were in that position, I would do the same. I would want to be a private person. I don't want people digging into my personal life, not because I have anything to hide, but because it's not anybody else's fucking business.
There's a lot we can say about James Garner. There's a lot of conversations to be had about him. And I think one of the most interesting has a strange bearing on the film we're going to talk about. And I think if you're going to talk about him, one of the things you'd have to reflect on are 2 big legal battles that he had with Hollywood studios. The first was Warner Brothers and the second was Universal. And in both cases, it was about sort of actors' rights and, actors' compensation, or, was he as an actor being compensated fairly through his contract for the work that he was doing? And in both cases, he was saying, I don't believe the studio is honoring the contract that we have signed. And he wasn't a crank. And he won both times. Now, whenever you fight a studio, it's a Pyrrhic victory. But the fact that he went out on a limb 2 times with studios, and his career, in a way, could have ended either of those times based on retribution. But he believed in what was right. And so he took a stand on principle and fought those fights. The third thing you should know about James Garner that a lot of his fans don't know, and I hesitate almost to even bring it up, but big liberal, big Democrat, marched with Martin Luther King, huge in the civil rights movement, believed deeply in the civil rights movement and in the politics of equality. and he made no secret of it. And for a guy who represents America to so many people, I was going to say, just for a guy who was such a sort of an American icon of American old-fashioned masculinity, I think that's something to keep in mind, that he had a certain, list of beliefs, and he did not keep those secret. He was out there in a way that also could have damaged his career greatly, and he felt that it was important, so he did it.
Well, and that's, you mentioned being like a genuine human being, and, being willing to lose your career for the things you believe in is, some people would look at it and say, like, what a moron, like what a moron to take this great thing that you have and to squander it standing up for what you believe. But at the same time, I feel like not doing that is the bigger missed opportunity than look, I'm not saying everyone who can and should be a martyr should be, but if that's something you choose to do and you want to do it, it's something worth, I think, like you said, like worth at least having a conversation about and looking at and saying, I might not do it, but I can respect the person that does. And to your point, if it bothers you that James Garner was a liberal, this might be the wrong show for you.
What's funny about the conversation we're having is that he was probably most famous for playing, again, the characters we were just talking about, Jim Rockford, Brett Maverick, and now Charlie Madison. Three characters who, especially Rockford and Maverick, who are sort of famous for not taking a stand and sort of like, I stick my neck out for no one. I'm just trying to survive. I'm not a hero. I'm a coward. I'm just trying to get through. And that was a part of his persona, a guy who was tough and was smart, but wasn't going to make a big deal out of it. And if there was a better way to get out of a fight, he'd get out of that fight. And that's what, he was so charming doing that. Anyway, it's funny to reflect on the difference between the man and the sort of the persona he was so famous for playing.
It's kind of in a lot of ways it's almost a rejection of the toxic masculinity of the time.
Right.
Which is, again, that's not a conversation people were having in 1964, but it's part of the broader masculine conversation now. Because again, part of, I think, this movie in a lot of ways has to do with toxic masculinity and the perception of, maybe not the perception of men as a whole, but organizations run and led by men. And what does that mean to have the perception of those organizations maybe not being seen as, how do we talk about this movie without just talking about it immediately? Just to say the perception sometimes matters just as much as the reality, if not more. And so much of this movie is about the perception of masculinity and what happens when that perception is shattered, if it can be shattered.
Well, so let's talk about the Americanization of Emily. And to sort of summarize what it is for the listener who may not have had a chance to see the movie yet. And if you haven't, I'm going to definitely say you should. It's funny, you and I haven't even talked about, I know how I feel about the movie. I don't know how you feel about it, but just to summarize the plot, James Garner plays Lieutenant Commander Charles E. Madison, and he plays a dog robber. Now, what the hell is a dog robber? Well, this is sort of an attaché to a high-ranking military figure, okay? So this is the guy that can get it for you. This is the guy who travels along and makes sure that the general, when he's visiting all these, foreign bases and foreign cities, and these are high-ranking people. This is almost like being a manager for a celebrity or a rock star.
Literally.
You got to make sure, right? You got to make sure the hotel room is set up the right way, and that the right booze is there and the right food, and you've got to make sure that all the comforts of home, and if that involves lining up women, that's what you do. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time reflecting on that because this is an 80-year-old movie about a 60-year-old event. Yeah, there was a lot of like, hey, you're young and pretty, go entertain this old crusty general. And out of that bargain, you're going to get a new dress and some great perfume and some booze and some chocolate and some stuff that may not be in wide supply in your part of the world
is not in wide supply, like at all. Like right? it's alluded to, like they have these things only because they're the U.S. military and they can get them. Like
right. So James Garner's character, you know, along with the general, the admiral that he works for, they roll into London, which is where our action takes place for the most part. And the story is about sort of meeting Charlie Madison, learning that he is a sort of survivor at heart, and will, you know, basically find a way to live his life so that he is never personally in mortal danger. And how that concept is tested against the points of view and beliefs and philosophies of the people that he comes into contact with, mostly Julie Andrews and James Coburn. James Coburn plays Lieutenant Commander Bus Cummings, who at first seems to share a lot of Charlie Madison's points of view about stay out of the line of fire. But then because his point of view changes, but when Bus Cummings' point of view shifts a little bit, it has a major impact on James Garner's character and what happens to him. So that's all I'll say for now, and we can get into the details of how Charlie Madison has to come face to face with, how he feels about being a hero in a war. And anyway, what did you think of the movie?
So, on this episode of the Culture Cast, like Richard just mentioned, I am Chris Dashew, still the host, and Richard Haddam is here. From, where are you from, Richard? Astonishing Legends own the Library of Richard Haddam. What's the name of your new podcast, Richard?
Richard Haddam's Paranormal Bookshelf.
Which is a great name.
and it's real, because, you know, I've turned my computer around and shown you my Paranormal Bookshelf.
It's true. But yeah. Do the books float on their own, or do you make them float? Or is that not how they're paranormal?
It reminds me of the old joke. I wrote a book about poltergeists. It's flying off the shelves.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, Dad.
You're welcome. You can expect more of that. Well, but to clarify even what we're talking about right now, later, a couple of months in March, I will be hosting my own podcast, and it's called Richard Haddam's Paranormal Bookshelf. It's about the books on my paranormal bookshelf. Every episode I'll talk about one of them, but I'll also talk about what was happening in my life when I read it, or what memories it brings up, or what part of my life it sort of connects to. So you're going to be getting a lot about the book, but you're also going to be getting a lot about me, my, growing up, working in Hollywood, the jobs I've had, the shows I've been on, the movies I've written, the people I've met. It all sort of comes together through the books. And it's really fun. And I think it's, if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about my life, either what I do for a living or just the weird, strange, sometimes happy, sometimes embarrassing things that have happened to me in my life, this is the podcast where you're going to hear all about it.
And how could you not be excited about something like that? I know I've already read some of the stuff you're working on, and it's great. So I'm excited to listen to it. And
thanks, man.
If you aren't excited to listen to it, well, that's on you, not on me, because we've done a pretty good job, I think, at giving you plenty of reason to listen to it, including the conversation we're about to have, like Richard mentioned, about the Americanization of Emily.
You lack principles, Charlie. Isn't there anything you'd die for?
Well, easy, Tiger. That's a tailored shirt.
Oh, shut up and let me kiss you.
The first dead man on Omaha Beach must be a sailor. Who is it?
Who is barging?
Boss, the strangest thing just happened.
Say, Charlie, close
Admiral
the door.
came barging into my room in his nightshirt. Buzz yelling at the top of his lungs, the first dead man on Omaha Beach must be a sailor.
Every few years, there comes a motion picture so extraordinary, so provocative, that it excites controversy and curiosity from its very inception. Such a film, one of the most important and talked about in more than a decade, is The Americanization of Emily.
Well, it's a hell of a D-Day, that's all I can say.
How did we ever get into this? What tomb?
Well, the tomb for the unknown sailor.
Unknown sailor. Holy cow!
Commander, I think you're out of your ever-loving mind.
But it all ends in someone's bed, doesn't it? I mean, that's the point, isn't it?
Think I want to tell my kids that on D-Day their father was shacked up at the Westchester Hotel? Will you stop jumping around?
Well, I'm naked, dear. I'm looking for something to put on.
This is my best friend, you Donny Witch, not the house detective. Now, just stand at attention while Commander Madson and I confer.
I'm a practicing coward.
You're quite dog robber.
I range girls, but individual tastes varied, of course.
You're despicable.
You're a scoundrel, Charlie. Seems I don't mind making love to a scoundrel, but I think it immoral to marry one.
Oh, we're gonna make a brass band hero out of Charlie.
How could you do this to me? Get your pants on, Mac. You're forever falling in love with men on their last nights of furlough. That's about the limit of your commitments. One night, a day, a month. You'd prefer lovers to husbands, hotels to homes.
I'm gonna slap your face, Charlie.
Go ahead, I won't hit you back. I'm a coward.
Like we've already kind of alluded to, the film stars James Garner and Julie Andrews. It's directed by Arthur Hiller, screenplay by Patty Chayefsky, which, that's a good thing, if not a great thing. It's based on the novel of the same name by William Bradford Hewell, and the film does star James Garner as, like Richard mentioned, Charlie Madison, a coward. And we'll leave it at that because we're going to be talking a whole bunch about it. And I want to tell you, Richard, I enjoyed this movie a lot, obviously. Like, I don't know how you could watch this movie and not enjoy it. I mean, I do know how you could watch it and not enjoy it. You don't like black and white movies, which, we're not here to be those people. I thought it was great. I mean, what's funny is, obviously, I think this is a movie in 2024. It has a lot of topicality still. I think, obviously, given the way the world is then and is now and, was, because this movie didn't come out during World War II. It came out essentially right before the Vietnam War, kind of as the Vietnam War was fomenting. I think it's a interesting anti-war movie. And, there's always that joke, right? Like, all war movies are anti-war movies, supposedly. But, so many of them, even the best anti-war movie ends up being a war movie. And this movie, I think, is a example of how you can make an anti-war movie the right way, which is, it's about the characters, not about the conflict. And it's about the characters' reaction to the conflict. And again, the conflict of World War II was so far-reaching that it's hard for us now in 2024 to comprehend war taking place across the globe, let alone war taking place across the globe where people are leaving from your neighborhood to go participate in it. We're not dealing with that right now, but if we were, there might be some of this that might ring a little truer. But again, the message of what the movie is going for, I think, is still as important then as it is now. And also, again, a kind of musing on what does it mean to be part of the war machine, and what are the machinations of the people within the war machine, and how does that affect an everyday person, theoretically, like Charlie Madison? Because while Charlie Madison is works as an attaché for a big time general, he is the same person that I would be, which is, I don't want to do any of this. I don't want to die. I mean, look, I'm not going to say I'm a coward. I would go and serve if needed, but I'm him. I'm sure you are too. It's I don't want to be don't put me in the middle of this. I don't want to die for this, because this is not something I want to die for. So I appreciated this movie immensely. And the message of the movie, I think, is as timely now as it was when the movie came out. And I think 50 years from now, when the movie's over 100 years old, it will still ring true, because human beings will constantly be in conflict with one another.
Yeah. And what I really like about the movie, and I've seen it, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, is in the first 15 minutes, you're sort of drawn into this little pie slice of the military or of the background of World War II that we never see. This is not a typical war movie where we're like, wait, why are we in a really nice hotel? It's like, oh, we're sort of backstage at the war, where admirals and generals are playing bridge in, these gorgeously appointed hotel rooms. And they're having very casual conversations about D-Day and who's going to do what, and well, the Army, the Army wants to do this, and early on we learn that the admiral that Charlie Madison works for is Admiral William Jessup, played by Melvin Douglas. And Jessup, he's head of the Navy, and he's like, look, this is going to be a defining moment in the war. And I really, when the history is written, which we're already in an era where that history is going to be written immediately in magazines and newspapers, I want the Navy to play, to be featured. So he ultimately comes up with this idea: the first man to die on the beaches of Normandy has to be a sailor.
It's just the worst fucking thing possible, right? Like, it really is the worst.
Well, but it's so funny because suddenly it's a little bit war satire, but it's also like almost a satire of the advertising industry and the entertainment industry. It's like, it's very much about, well, how are we going to sell this? Because the admiral knows that at a certain point, once the war is over, every branch of the American military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, are all going to be jockeying for position again. Right. It's like, well, here's why we're important. We're not at war right now, but look at what we did in the last war. Give us some money. So he's already thinking that way. And you're like, oh, so that's what generals and admirals think about. They're not just moving pieces around on a giant map of the world. They're worried about it's almost like the president of a university isn't an academic. They're a fundraiser.
Right. They're the money maker. They make the money for the university.
Yeah. It's like their only job is to make money, is to get people to donate buildings and scholarships and, professorships. That's what they do. So it's like, oh, wow, that's right. Okay. So of course, James Garner's character has a front row seat to all of this stuff, but he's out of the line of fire because he's not an infantryman. He has a very different position, and his position perfectly suits his personal philosophy. And as we learn a little later, his personal philosophy is, I have no personal philosophy. I don't stand for anything. I don't believe in heroes. I'm an avowed coward. I don't pump up the idea of heroism because that's how people get killed. I live for the moment. I'm almost a sensualist. He's like, I live in the fact of the moment. And if in the moment I am happy and warm and well fed and with somebody I love, then I've achieved the height of what a human can achieve. And he deals in sensuality. That's his job. I'm going to provide the best liquor, the best cut of meat, the best, the ungettable produce in the middle of winter in London. You will have your avocado salad. You will drink your champagne out of Dutch glassware off, Italian linen. You will have the best, and that's what I'm good at, providing the sensual satisfaction of the moment. And again, sometimes that will include women.
And so that's the thing that I find interesting. Like you mentioned, the idea of this character, like it's such a weird war movie because I can't think of another war movie that goes anywhere near any of this. I mean, these are the things that you kind of see out of the periphery in most war movies, but it's just not a thing because, again, like you mentioned, I mean, it for whatever reason, it's weird to me that it's not more of a thing, that it hasn't been covered in more media. This idea of like, what are these generals doing when they're not in the war room? What are the like what is going on? And I think that, again, like where this movie starts is such an interesting spot, and then I kind of, the only issue I have with this movie is the idea, like, and I don't think it's very well, not thought out, but I don't think it's well explained what's going on with his boss when his boss starts, quote, cracking up, unquote. Right. It's like, it's such a very antiquated thing. I think now we would call that like having a panic attack or like an anxiety attack or like a manic episode almost. Cause like he just, he starts acting like someone who in now would be like someone with dementia. Like, like he starts talking to people that aren't there, thinking of things that are just like, again, not great ideas given what ends up happening. But at the same time, like later in the movie, he's like, I don't remember that. And it's like, that's not cracky. That's like something else entirely.
Well, you're completely right. But I thought, like, if this movie had been made in like the 80s, Jack Nicholson could play Jessup.
Oh, totally.
You know, like picture the character from A Few Good Men, but picture we dial him down a little bit in terms of sort of like, you know, rageful energy. And he's a guy who's done a lot, seen a lot, spent his life in the military, but now he's beginning to sort of have these sort of like episodes where he's not sure where he is. Like you said, he's kind of drifting, and people are like, well, is he just being eccentric? Is he getting a little old?
Yeah. What's the deal
worry about this? Like, he's not foaming at the mouth and, you know, punching his fist through walls. So it happens fairly quietly.
Right.
And he sort of drifts in and out of it. So it's like, wait, did that actually happen? Or, well, okay, we're fine. It becomes a plot device.
A kind of lazy one, but I don't know how else you get around it in 1956.
Right.
Like,
because it has no further, effect on any other part of the story or the theme other than he comes up with kind of, and by the way, it's not even that crazy an idea. Like I would have no trouble believing that an admiral was like, I am advocating for Marines to hit that beach first so that we get the guts and the glory.
Right.
You know, we get the Tomb of the Unknown Sailor, but also if we win, it's because we were there first. So
right.
First through the door, you know?
Right. First through the door, death's door, door. And like, I'm with you. It's not like the idea that is proposed in the movie and in the book is like, yeah, let's shoot the footage of the first person hitting the beach who's ostensibly going to be the first person to die, which is what they're making. You know, that's kind of the implication. I don't think it's that crazy of an idea. Frankly, I'm surprised I'm surprised someone hasn't said that was floated at some point.
And who knows? Like, maybe this was based on a real thing. So to fill the audience in that's listening, in case you haven't seen the movie, the notion of the first man to die on the beaches of Normandy must be a sailor. So the admiral acts on this idea by assigning James Garner, Charlie Madison, to get together a film crew that will travel with the Marines, who will travel out in these boats and try to, deactivate the mines that are along the coast.
Yeah,
So that the other naval vehicles can come in successfully and get close enough to offload men who can then run up on the beach. It's Saving Private Ryan. And
literally.
But if enough get through, and enough will get through, if you bring enough people, and some will get through, then you will, it can change the course of the war. So the idea is get a film crew. I want this to be filmed. I want people to see it. So the idea is if we get this footage, then we have proven that we have participated in the war in a crucial way. And, so it's through this odd construction that the viewer sort of goes, okay, well, now that we know that he's a coward, now that we know he will do anything to avoid trouble, we know this is not going to work out well for James Garner. Something's going to happen. We don't know how, but somehow he's going to be placed in danger because of this idea. And of course, the rest of the movie is how by twists and turns, he ends up being placed on a boat with a camera in his hand. He's the one who's got to do the filming, and he's going to be the one out there. And then he personally becomes the first human being on the beaches at Normandy. And in the first 15 minutes of the movie, once you hear this idea, somehow that's where it's going to get to. You just don't know how and what the fuck is going to happen and why.
It's the inevitability of the screenwriting and the story that I absolutely love about this movie. Like, the best movies feel like the ending is inevitable, and like the level of inevitability is like, yeah, James Garner, there's literally no way you're not there's no way you're not the person that they keep talking about. But can I just say with absolute certainty, there are few places in time in history that I would rather not be than on the fucking PT boats or whatever the fuck those things are heading to the beaches of Normandy. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, yeah. I know that Saving Private Ryan, that's the closest we've ever gotten to being there. Like, I'm sure that's probably still only like a tenth of it, because like anytime I see D-Day and anything, it makes me like, it makes me so nauseous because like just thinking about being on those boats and like, this movie kind of downplays it because they're about to get off the boat gets hit with a mortar and they go flying through the air, which should have killed them anyways. It doesn't. So, the movie wants to take that into account. That's fine. But the idea of D-Day is just like, it's hard for me to fathom sitting here in the comfort of my own home that like this was a thing that people were like, we're doing this. Like, it's just, it's horrifying. And like you are in James Garner's shoes immediately because it's like, this is the last place anybody on the earth wants to be on this day in history is on that beach in Normandy. And here you are with your camera and no way to defend yourself. Fuck you. Like, fuck you, dude. Like literally fuck you is what ends up happening in this movie.
And totally without the psychological armor of this is a good cause. I'm going to be a hero. I absolutely want to give my life for my country. This is a moral thing to do. It is the right thing to do. It's the principled thing to do.
Democracy.
Yeah, like all of the sort of psychological fortifications that the military kind of, provides you with / beats into you so that you can walk into situations where you will likely lose your life, but do it effectively and with a clear. You can still carry out your mission. You don't completely lose your shit. Well, of course, Charlie Madison has none of this. Like literally 12 hours ago, he did not think he was going to be here, didn't want to be here, doesn't believe in it, shouldn't be here. And there he is. And yet for a movie that is ostensibly a comedy and is very funny at points, this is not funny. This is played very quiet in a way and not even in an overly dramatic, like, oh, now it's the serious part of the movie. It's more like, well, now we're really here. Now we're in the boat with him. I mean, again, it's like Saving Private Ryan. We're
literally
along and we're looking at this guy and we're just like, that's how I would feel.
Yeah,
like,
literally.
What am I doing here? Like, I have no business being here.
That's what I mean. It's like it's fucking horrifying. Like this movie isn't anywhere near as like, intense as Saving Private Ryan, but some of those shots, it's just like, it's really hard to not put yourself in those shoes of like anyone in that boat. Just seeing those shots of like the guy hanging off the side of the boat as they come onto the beach. It's like, fuck this. Just like, fuck this in the worst kind of way. Like, I'm sorry. It's just horrifying.
We've spent so much time in this movie in these beautiful hotel rooms and offices and just as far removed from war and the reality of war as you can possibly be. For a war movie, this is not Platoon or, Full Metal Jacket. We're in these rarefied places. And Garner looks great, and everyone's in these, beautifully cut suits and uniforms, and it's a pleasure to look at. It's a pleasure to be there. And then by degrees, in the the last half hour of the movie, where they go to the base where the D-Day is being launched, and now we're in the barracks, and then we're in the boat, and then we're in the water, and we're just as an audience being lowered and lowered in status, from the top admiral to the lowest sailor, who are literally, the guy next to him was just vomiting into his helmet. And it's so funny because the guy who's vomiting into his helmet, he's doing it as, the admiral, the other admiral, is giving a speech about how honorable and what a great moment this is and how lucky you are to be a part of this. And the guy's just puking in his helmet. And it's like, yes, this speech makes us all want to vomit.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing, like you mentioned with James Garner, like no amount of that going on in the background while he's in that boat is going to change how he feels about this. Because again, like you said, like some of this has to be framed in a way that, like, yes, this movie is coming out before Vietnam, which is a war that is hard to stand by as an American because it was seemingly done for, again, to prevent the spread of communism. Whatever the fuck you think that means in 2024 is your fucking definition. But Vietnam War, not something we should have been involved in. World War II, however, I don't think either one of us is going to disagree that was a war we had no choice but to get involved in because the stakes on the line. The thing that's funny is James Garner's character rejects what the stakes are. This is not Vietnam where like the stakes are kind of, in your opinion, I don't like Vietnam. Like World War II had to happen. The United States had to get involved. We didn't have a choice. Like, And in a lot of ways, like that's where the moral majority or the moral high ground comes from with World War II, right? With the character that James Coburn plays, which is like, we're doing this for America, men. And it's weird that James Garner's character even rejects that. Like in a morally just war, even this character rejects that. And that is, to me, the thing that is really interesting about his character is he's like, I make no bones about it. Not only do I not like this war, I detest all wars in general and conflict completely. And it has nothing to do with this being just or unjust. Like this, it's me, and it's me having a problem with it.
And again, this was not the first time I saw the movie, but it's a rather dense film. I mean, it's Paddy Chayefsky, so there's a lot of ideas and a lot of very sophisticated dialogue filled with ideas, flying around the room. But there was a moment in the middle where I'm like, well, now wait a second. Why is he working in the military at all if he is so anti-war? But then they continually sort of go back and go, he's not anti-military, he's not anti-war. He personally embraces his own philosophy of I am a coward. He's not out there with a sign protesting out in front of. He's sort of like I don't stand on any principle other than my own personal survival, and by survival I mean the right to exist peacefully. Right. So he's almost more like Gandhi or something. He's just like, I will always find myself a place where I will be able to be the most of what I am, which is the sensualist, which is the person who provides physical comfort to myself and others. And if that happens to be working for this admiral, I have no problem with that. I am no more principled anti-war than pro-war. I am just against the notion of tricking yourself into believing people died heroically when they didn't. They most likely died very ignominiously and in terror. But we don't like to think about that. So we build monuments and go, it's kind of a joke. People say, he lost his battle with cancer. And it's like, well, what are we saying when we say that? That he failed? That this person that we're talking about who died of cancer, well, he fought cancer, but he just wasn't up to the fight and cancer won. It's like, if you've ever been with someone who is suffering from a disease that is attacking their body, whether they're engaged in a moral fight against it or not, it's a terrible thing and it's ugly. And and whether you fight it or don't fight it, sometimes doesn't have a lot to do with whether you are still alive, 5 years later. So it's this whole notion we have sometimes as Americans, I think, of, well, are you going to fight or are you going to not fight and just be a coward? And what are you going to do about it? And how we frame our everyday lives,
Right. Well, in a lot of ways, like it's a condemnation of that, which is the American interest in conflict and framing everything as a conflict. I mean, even
that you must triumph.
Right. I mean, even something like, and this is always a thing that cracks me up. It's like the people of, say, Philadelphia and Dallas realistically have no reason to detest one another, but because those two football teams, the Cowboys and the Eagles, have a rivalry because of the part of the league that they're in, people from Philadelphia probably think lesser of people from Dallas. And that's literally because of something that has been created and crafted into a created conflict. And it's like, what does that help anyone other than, again, like this idea of you take sports and you turn it into a conflict. It's a battle and you have victors and the losers. And by framing things as conflict, you give it this weird moral justness of the winners winning and the losers losing. And you hear sometimes, if you're a sports fan, you hear like, the better team didn't win today. And it's like, what the fuck does that shit even mean? Like, what it does, like that, what? Okay. Yeah, maybe that is the case. Like, it's like, and you know what? Like, you could say the same thing about armed conflict. Sometimes the better team didn't win, but the other side thinks they're right. If you're on the other side, you think you're right and you did win. So it's perspective and where you're standing. If you're standing on one side of the room, you think the other side of the room is better or worse or looks better, just like the other person on that side of the room may think the same of the side you're standing.
The notion that the better team lost, is really interesting because part of the the truism of sports is that, sorry, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Oh, it rained. Oh, your best player got sick the week before, whatever. It's like, whatever happens on the day between the time we blow the whistle and the time we blow the whistle the last time, that's the game. That is defined as the game, and whoever is ahead at the end, they're the winners, and we can argue about it all we want, but the history books are written. What I was going to say is, now I'll, give you, my news of my week. Of course, I've had COVID this week, so I've been battling COVID. COVID's winning. No, it really isn't. I'm fighting it to a standstill. Chris, I swear to God, I'm going to win this fight.
You're going to win it, Richard. Overcome it.
I will overcome it. But while I've been sick, I have revisited the Rocky movies. And so I watched Rocky 1 through Rocky 4, and then I watched the first couple of Creed movies. And what's always fun about these movies is how, regardless of who wins any given fight, it's always about, well, yeah, but what was really going on with Rocky at the time? Like, first of all, most people forget that Rocky didn't win that first movie.
He loses.
He loses. And when I watch it, the movie is so well done that even though he lost, you don't feel like he lost because you're so focused on he achieved his goal of going the distance. Adrian is running to him. All the victory iconography is with him, even as they're cutting away these very quick cuts into the background of people going, okay, in a split decision, okay, Apollo Creed. And Apollo Creed looks like the loser because he's miserable because he didn't win better. Rocky looks like the winner because the light's on him and his fist is in the air, but he's the loser technically, but he feels like the winner. And all throughout all the Rocky movies, they just play that theme over and over again. You won, but you didn't really win. Well, you lost, but you really won. And how are we going to, even this up by the end of the movie, or are we? And they're always relitigating, did the better person win? Anyway, all of which is to say, Charlie Madison rejects all this in the most beautiful Petty Chayefskian language. And I'm so proud of James Garner because you may not think he's a guy who can handle these page-long speeches, but boy, does he. And he sells them like nobody's business.
I was really surprised with some of the monologues because, like, when I was reading, about the movie, I was like, a lot of these monologues that James Garner gives, and I was like, oh shit, James Garner monologues. But you're totally right, and it's the sincerity with which he performs the monologues, but the way he performs the role that it's just like you said. I mean, is he kind of playing the same kinds of characters that he's known for playing and or would be known for playing and became kind of known for playing? Yes, but so what? Like that ease with which he does it, I think doesn't necessarily mean every time he does it it's going to be fantastic. But here, every time they give him those moments to kind of tell us why you are the way you are, he nails it, and it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like a put on either, and it's so believable because he's so earnest in his delivery.
And it's such a verbal movie. Even when he and Julie Andrews are rolling around by the side of a pond, making out with each other, I mean, you just know it's like, okay, if we stay with them long enough, we're going to see them having sex.
Right.
It's like, that's what this scene is about. And yet, as they're making out, they are having a philosophical discussion about life and war. And it works because it is coming from wherever their characters are. And it's so well done that you almost don't notice it. But it's like, wow, this movie doesn't miss a trick. It's like constantly redefining where the characters are at any given moment. And then later, when they break up, because of course, it's enough of a romantic comedy where they do have to break up, they have a fight that you think for a second, oh, is this just going to be like a trumped up, stupid? And
I loved this scene so much. It was so it was bizarre in the way it was written, right? Like, I have never seen a scene like this in a movie before in terms of like a romantic movie. Like, no, it was shocking is the word I would use. Like, I laughed out loud at 3 of the lines because I was like, when is this movie? 64 is when this movie came out? Like, you must be out of your mind.
And it's amazing because you think in romantic comedies, you sort of have the feeling of, well, I get it. You guys have to break up because it's, 90 minutes into the movie and we've got 15 more to go, and okay, I get it. But here, when they break up, it's like, oh, he is further defining what he's doing in this moment. She is further defining what her feelings are. You don't feel that either one of them is copping out.
Right.
But you totally get why they're in love. You totally get why they're breaking up. You don't blame either one of them. Your heart breaks for both of them. And it places the audience in a very vulnerable position, because it places Charlie in a vulnerable place. When he gets on that plane, you're like, well, whatever happens to him from here on out, he no longer has the one thing that he really wanted, which was this relationship. And now he really is untethered. And when the final bits of his plan just dissolve in front of him and it becomes clear, oh, dude, you're getting on that boat and you're getting in the water and you're going to get your ass blown up. He doesn't play it like, well, it doesn't matter because, I no longer have love, so I don't care if I die. It's more like, now my life just adds up to nothing.
Right.
I just have nothing. Like the one thing I wanted was just what any normal human being wants. I just wanted to marry the woman I love and have a child and have a life. That's all I wanted.
Yeah.
Very simple thing. And now I'm not even going to get that. I'm just going to get fucking nothing. And I'm going to die a miserable death. It's really cold.
It is. And, we haven't really talked about Julie Andrews a whole lot. And I think you mentioned like the layering of the themes of the movie. And we haven't really talked about, we've mentioned the American aspect of the movie, but the title, The Americanization of Emily, can I just say, not a great title. I don't think it's a particularly great title. The title makes perfect sense given where the movie ends up. But Julie Andrews' character could have been such not a wasted opportunity, but could have just been really, and it may have been written rather flat on the paper. I don't think it was, given who wrote the script, but the character could have been so generic in a way that we've seen in these kinds of movies, but she isn't, because she is able to stand up to James Garner's cowardice by having her own deeply held tenets and beliefs about these things, about her husband, about her father, about her brother, which again, it's weird in and of itself where she's coming at it from, because her whole thing is, I seemingly am attracted to men who have a finite amount of time connected to them, however that is interpreted, be it because they're at this hospital and then they're leaving, or be it because they're going off to war. And that seems to be something that she can't escape. And yet she doesn't want to escape it in that scene with James Garner, even though she kind of alludes to wanting more than to see her prospective lover die for the great cause. She doesn't want that either until she does. And I love that we get to see a conflict in her character, because she wants it, but she doesn't, but she does. And Julie Andrews plays it perfectly. And it could have felt so wishy-washy in that scene. But again, the earnestness in that scene between the two of them, where he's like, you're a bitch. You're a bitch. Well, it's like, yeah, like, shocking. Yeah, I laughed out loud. I was like, holy shit, really? But it's the truth. And I think it's an extension of the line earlier in the movie where you're like, you're a prig. And it's like, it's kind of the extension of that line. It's that line dialed up one more beat, which is, you're a bitch really just means you're kind of unyielding in your beliefs to a point that's hard to deal with. But at the same time, so is James Garner. Like that. And that's what she says back to him. It's like, but you're the same way, dude. And it's like, well, that is why you two work together, is because maybe that idea of opposites attracting is true.
Yeah. And, early on, so in one of their earliest scenes, which is, I think, maybe my favorite scene in the movie, where Julie Andrews brings him home to meet her mom. Now, we learn that Julie Andrews, as this young-ish woman, 30-ish, whatever, has lost a brother in the war, has lost a husband in this war, lost her father. So these three people in her life have all died, it sounds like, within the last 5 years.
Right.
So it's like, wow, okay, that's bad. Like, just on a human level, that's bad. And so, Garner comes over and meets the mom, and Julie Andrews says, my mom still talks about my dad as if he's alive. It's her way of coping. So just kind of roll with it. But during that scene, Garner starts telling a story about his past. And the story involves his previous marriage that Julie Andrews was unaware of. and is like, huh? And he tells the story about how he was married, was sent into a war zone, and then ended up coming home. And you think what Julie Andrews thinks, which is, oh, okay, I get it. And then what happened, of course, is you came home and your wife had taken up with someone else and it led to a divorce. And he's like, no. He's like, my coming back alive and healthy ruined our relationship because she didn't cheat on me. She couldn't cheat on me. That would have ruined her chance to be virtuous. The stoic woman at home while her husband's off at war. The worst thing I could have done was come home and take that away from her.
Right.
And that's what led to our divorce. And you hear that and you're just like, whoa.
It's wild. It's like it's actually batty, right? Like,
yeah, it's like cynical, but you're like, oh, but I mean, I get that. Like, I can see that is the way a human relationship would play out. Wow. And he says, yeah. So, he's like, after that, I was just very, I knew that this was not for me. So I never wanted to be in the position to have someone, exalt themselves over my death that I didn't earn and didn't want. And so I'm against the notion of making of sort of sort of reassuring ourselves post facto that because someone died in a war, they are retroactively a hero.
Yes.
And therefore it's a good thing, and therefore other people should want to die in the same way. He's like, no, none of that bullshit. When you die in war, you're dying scared, dirty, and afraid. He doesn't say this, but he's basically saying, you die begging for your mother. And it isn't heroic, it's inhumane, and we shouldn't profane someone's death by then calling them a hero and thus tempting more people to die in the same horrible way.
Which is so fucking wild to hear being put into words. And I'm not just saying because this movie came out in 1964. I'm just talking about in general, because I don't know about you, I agree with that sentiment 100%. That's right? Something that might be supremely unpopular, but so much of the war machine lives and breathes off of this aspect of it, which is keeping the soldiers fed and happy and in the dark about the reality of what's going on. Again, like we hear it on the news all the time, when we were in Afghanistan, there was like one airman died today. And it's like, it was probably rather ignominious because it often, if not always is, because again, like this conflict, unless I guess if you genuinely believe in what you're doing over there, then it's probably okay that you died for it. But again, like the idea of you are retroactively a hero because you died in a combat zone, and what does that mean for everybody else and how is that used is, I think, such an interesting question. And I think then to go that step further of, well, do we have to have an unknown sailor? So instead of just, allowing the first person who died to be that unknown sailor, we have to have we have to create that. Yeah. That. And what's funny is, have you ever seen Amazon Women on the Moon, the sketch comedy film? So in that movie, in the extended version of the movie, there is a skit. And because again, it's a skit movie, right? There's a sketch comedy. In that sketch, it's called The Unknown Soldier, and it has like Robert Loggia and Ronnie Cox and Bernie Casey, and the three of them have a similar conversation because I think one is Army, one is Marines, and one is something else, and it's taking place during World War I, and they're like, hey, the war is over, but all of the casualties have been accounted for, so we don't have someone to be the unknown soldier. And so they bring Wallace Langham in they tell him like, hey, would you like to have like permanent immortality? Do you want to be like known forever? And he's like, yeah. And so they convince him to kill himself to be the unknown soldier. And it's like, when I was watching this, all I could think was they had to have seen this. Like they had, or like had read the book, because this is that idea not played. I mean, in that sketch, Wallace Langham they cut away to them he's off screen and they're talking and you hear someone shoot themselves. So it's implied he goes through with it, which is like way darker than this movie gets. But at the same time, it's asking that same question, like, what does that actually mean for that person to be unknown anything? And how does that happen? Like, because everybody who enlisted, theoretically, right, again, like that, those records are kept. Like, that's all I'm saying. Dog tags exist. Like,
and it does make you think why this movie isn't better known and why it isn't mentioned in the same breath with, MASH and Dr. Strangelove and all of those sort of, famous anti-war comedies. And in a way,
Apocalypse Now, like,
well, Apocalypse Now isn't a comedy. It's.
But I mean, like, but I'm saying, like, in terms of like anti-war, like that's another, like, why this isn't mentioned even with that or any of them at all, frankly. Like,
and it's funny because there's not a lot of war in it. It's not broad. So it's not like, well, welcome to the wacky world of the war where everything is crazy, because you'd have to be. It's like it suggests that, but it doesn't do it in a broad sort of, I don't know. I haven't seen Catch 22, so I don't know
yucks are being had.
Yeah, I don't know how crazy that gets, but there have been more sort of broad anti-war satires. This one is so sophisticated and there's so many ideas, and it's taking on every scene. You have to sort of stop and go, okay, now what are we being presented with here? What are these points of view and who's on what side exactly? I mean, it's not confusing. It's not difficult to watch, but you're constantly engaged in this sort of chess game of ideas of people just sort of getting through their lives and trying to, and in a weird way, on this viewing, the James Coburn character became the most interesting to me because he does seem to share Charlie Madison's, like, hey, we're just in this game to benefit ourselves.
Right.
We're gaming the system every day and we're just going to try to get through. But at some point in the middle, he turns. And he's like, no, you know what? We're wrong. We've got to be involved in this fight, and we've got to actually stand up for, the Navy. And of course, it's so great because Charlie's like, wait, like literally some of the most apoplectic moments from James Garner are like, what has happened to you?
Yeah.
What got in your head? You're literally going to get me killed. And now Coburn's the one going, listen, soldier, you should be proud to die. He's like, what are you talking about? You're going to get us both killed. And it is a little strange. I couldn't diagnose exactly where that moment was or why he changed, but he does change.
Yeah, I will say not issues I had with this movie, but the two moments I wish were given a little bit more time to breathe was James Coburn kind of becoming more of like a sycophant. And then honestly, and again, it kind of goes back to the James Coburn character. I was shocked at how quickly this movie wrapped up. And he's back and they're fine and it's good. And he doesn't want to be a hero, but now he does. And it's like, well, the Americanization of Emily part of this movie took like 2 minutes, like literally like 2-3 minutes. It was shocking to me how rushed the moments that should have been given time to breathe for the most part are, but these two specific moments, again, when James Coburn kind of loses it and becomes the person that he proclaimed to not be, is one of them. But then at the end, it's like, I wanted to see James Garner actually have more of a moment there with Julie Andrews about this idea of like, I still don't want to be a hero and I want to tell the truth. Like, I needed that scene to be given a little bit more time because it's similar to the thing with James Coburn. It's like, these are big moments that cannot afford to be rushed because I need to understand it. And the movie's already done a very good job of letting me know it can expand on those ideas rather well. And it's not going to get bogged down in like contrite bullshit dialogue. Like, that's the one thing Patty Chayefsky's not going to do, is waste words coming out of characters' mouths.
Well, that is funny. In that final scene, so much has to be accomplished. And I think the audience is very skillfully drawn in to James Garner's point of view because, and again, spoiler alerts. So now we're at the end of the movie. Now 10 minutes before the end of the movie, we think we see James Garner killed on the beaches of Normandy. And then we're a week later, Everyone's been informed of his death. He's on the cover of every magazine as the first, the first person to die on the beaches of Normandy was indeed a Navy man. And we have a handful of scenes that are in the aftermath of his death, and we're fairly convinced he is dead, even though that breaks movie rules. But anyway, we get to the final scene where we learn that he is alive. And now, of course, James Coburn is like, okay, look, now the story has to be a celebration that you're alive. So there's going to be a parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. The president's going to be involved. You're going to be the biggest war hero of all time. In other words, you're going to become the symbol of everything you detest and don't believe in. And that runs completely counter to your philosophy. And you're like, well, wait, what's going to happen? And Garner is like, no, I'm not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to ruin everyone's day by puncturing the image, and I'm going to tell the truth, and it's going to be the worst publicity you've ever had, and I'll probably go to the brig. I'll be locked up for insubordination and for being, a poor sport, but that's fine, because I'm not going to let you turn this into some military PR victory for yourself. And you're like, oh, fuck. Yeah, no, that is what he has to do, but then that's going to suck too. And then amazingly, Julie Andrews sort of saves the day and goes, whoa, who's this guy standing on principle?
Why are you doing me now? Why are you doing me? Why are you doing me? That's really what it is. Like, why are you doing me now? What the fuck?
And she's like, to be true to yourself is not to work against this image and puncture it on a worldwide basis. To really be you is to take advantage of the situation and then go enjoy your life.
Right.
And to do anything less than that, you're now going to do all the things you said you would never do, which is stand on principle and stand up for a philosophy, because that's what gets people killed and that's what ruins people's lives. And you can do that if you want, but if you do, you are going to go to the brig, we're not going to get married, and everything you wanted, you're not going to get. So why not be self-serving? Why not put yourself first? Go ahead and let them make you a hero, because it's not like you're going to stop war.
Right.
And then you and I can go have the life that we wanted. And it's so brilliant. It's just like, because you don't see it coming, but when it's served up to you in that way, you're like, oh, they set all the pieces in place. She's 100% right. Garner doesn't have a leg to stand on. And he's finally like, Jesus, you're right. Okay.
And then the movie ends. Yeah, I do like where Julie Andrews comes in from. It's very abrupt, I think, for me. But like, again, that's a me problem, not a movie problem. But man, that's the writing of Patty Chayefsky in full effect. It's it's verbal chess being played between the two kind of moral towers of the movie. And yeah, she's right. And that is, again, like, that makes sense in the scope of the movie, in the narrative that they're telling. Why would he all of a sudden?
Yeah.
Like, why are you changing who you are? If not, and he doesn't really give a reason other than just because that's the quote right thing to do. And again, what is the right thing to do? Is it to do the morally just thing? Is it to be true to yourself? The movies takes a pretty, I think, strong stand on what it thinks, which is to be genuine and true to yourself, right? Like, be who you always have been, regardless of the situation you're being put in, because that tends to maybe help you get out of that situation in a way that doesn't require you to be thrown in jail for however many years he would, if not forever, given probably the scope of what James Garner's kind of heroicism is being claimed as. Like, he would go to jail for a long time if he had. Yeah, like, it's not a couple years type thing.
Well, yeah, and there's a million different kinds of movies and a million different brands of cynicism and ways that he could have dealt with this, and the way he could have extorted the military. It's like, look, I know the truth, so if you want me to shut up, do this or do that.
Make it worth my while.
Make it worth my while. But even that's a slightly, the targets of this movie and the philosophy of the movie is so particular, because it's not traditionally anti-war. It's almost anti-pretense.
Right.
And anti, don't select an intellectual quality to wear as a crown. because that will work against you living your life. So not only don't walk around trying to be a war hero, but don't anoint yourself as the war widow either.
Right. Exactly.
Because by being the war widow, you're perpetuating the problem,
Right. Yeah.
Except that your people died likely for no reason, and accept that your life will be worse because they're not around, but don't wrap yourself in this image of, the bereaved widow of the war hero, because that doesn't do it either. And it's just, it's interesting. Just when you think, it's like, oh, it's one of these movies. It's like, no, not quite. We're our own thing. And my God, I mean, there is no more perfect actor to play that role than James Garner. I honestly don't know who you're going to get who's going to do a better job.
Well, and that is the thing. I mean, again, like you've mentioned, this idea of it's not being an anti-war movie, but a movie about no pretense. Like, again, if you want the perfect actor to deliver those monologues, it's James Garner. Because again, he feels genuine throughout. And I mean, again, if you had swapped the roles and had James Coburn doing the James Garner role, it wouldn't have worked as well. I mean, even if you just take the two actors in the movie and swap them, it's this something about who James Garner is and the energy that he has makes that last scene believable. And again, like you mentioned, the idea of everybody plays a part in perpetuating this war system, be it the idea of heroism, the idea of doing something for your country, and in that being a thing worth doing just because you're doing it for your country. Like, all of those ideas kind of get rolled into one at the end. And like you said, I mean, at the end of the movie, by the time Julie Andrews makes the plea to James Garner that she does, and he listens, you realize, like you said, like, this movie is not really, it's not playing fair, but that's okay. It doesn't have to. It wants to tell this specific story, which has very little realistically to do with war. I mean, it is an anti-war movie, but I think the message of the movie is more important than just anti-war. It's the idea of it's better to go out on your shield as who you are than go out on the sword for someone else.
Yeah.
I will say, in terms of James Garner and Julie Andrews' chemistry together, my God in heaven. And I understand why they both go out and say publicly that this is their favorite, like, roles that they've done and their favorite movie, like, of their career. Because, like, this is a practically perfect movie, if not a perfect movie. Like, this is a really good movie.
Well, yeah. And I would say to the listening audience, this is one of the joys of doing this kind of podcast. And I'm so glad, Chris was game to sort of add it in really quick, because this is not a movie that most people know about. And yet I have yet to recommend it to anyone who has not absolutely loved it. So I heartily recommend it to the listener. Please check out The Americanization of Emily. I think you will just be blown away, and it's a hidden gem. And that's what we're here to bring out.
That's honestly what it feels like. Like, I had Susan mentioned it when we did Victor Victoria. And then you mentioned it to me because you listened to the episode, and I had looked it up after we talked about it because I was going to watch it anyways. But then you were like, let's do it. So I was like, okay. And yeah, the thing that I am most shocked by ending this episode is that I had not seen this movie before, and that I had not had this movie mentioned at any point up until now. And I hadn't seen this come up in, like, again, because this feels like a movie that what it's talking about is still part of the conversation that we're having now in so many ways. Even not just about war, but about, like, proving oneself or going out to do things for other people and doing things for yourself. Like, so many of these things still topical in 2024.
Yeah. And when you've got James Garner, Julie Andrews, a script by Patty Chayefsky, and directed by Arthur Hiller, this is a big movie. So, well worth your time, I think. Worth your time.
I agree. No, totally. As kind of a bonus this month, I think it is definitely a standout. So, Richard, until the next time you join me for either something that's on the schedule or something that is completely spontaneous, where can people find you and the things that you work on?
Well, they can, pretty soon they'll be able to find me at Richard Haddam's Paranormal Bookshelf, coming in late March 2024. And I couldn't be more excited. So check out wherever you listen to podcasts. And in March, you'll be hearing more and more. And pretty soon you'll be able to hear it
And, well, you can also find me and you on Rankin' on Bond, which is a fun little thing that we do together.
Yeah. Well, we've been doing that.
Yeah. And that you can check that out on Patreon/CultureCast or Patreon/Projection Booth, because Mike and I are both sharing that on our respective Patreons at the $10 level. So if that's something you want to hear, Richard and Mike and I talk about James Bond, which if you're listening to this, I can't imagine it's something you don't want to hear. You should go check that out, sign up, and give it a listen, because we're going to be releasing the second episode here pretty quick, I think within the next week, where we're going to be finally actually talking about James Bond movies with, well, early James Bond movies, pre-Eon, with 2 Casino Royales. So that's where you can find us, where you can find me, and everything else is over at weirdingwaymedia.com. And yeah, Richard, thank you so much for joining me and programming the episode. It's fun as always. So
thanks, man.
And as always, we'll catch you on the next episode.